The dust storm came out of nowhere that August afternoon in 1878, turning the sky above Abilene, Kansas, into a swirling brown hell that sent every sensible person running for cover. But Emmeline Harper had never been accused of being sensible, which was why she found herself clinging to the side of an overturned stagecoach 3 miles outside of town, with blood running down her temple and her carpet bag lost somewhere in the prairie grass. She could barely see 5 feet in front of her face, the grit working its way into her eyes and mouth despite the handkerchief she pressed against her face. The 2 other passengers had scattered when the horses broke free, and the driver lay motionless near the front wheel, his neck bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. Emmeline was a school teacher from Boston, 23 years old, and woefully unprepared for the reality of Kansas territory, but she had enough sense to know that staying with the wreckage was her best chance of being found once the storm passed. The wind howled like something alive and angry, and she squeezed her eyes shut against the assault of sand and debris. She had been traveling to take up a teaching position in a small settlement west of Abilene, her first real adventure after spending her entire life in the cramped streets of Boston under the watchful eye of her aunt. The position had seemed like freedom, like possibility, like everything she had ever wanted. Now it seemed like the worst decision she had ever made. She heard something through the wind, a sound that might have been a voice or might have been her imagination. Emmeline forced her eyes open, squinting through the brown haze. A shape materialized from the storm, tall and leading a horse, moving with the kind of certainty that suggested he could see through the dust or simply did not care what lay in his path. "Hello?" Her voice came out as a rasp, barely audible over the wind. The shape resolved itself into a man as he drew closer, leading a paint horse by the reins. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, and a bandana over his nose and mouth. His eyes, the only part of his face she could see clearly. They were gray, she noticed, gray as winter rain. "You hurt?" His voice was rough, muffled by the bandana, but audible. "I don't think so, not badly. The driver, She gestured toward the front of the coach. The man moved past her to check on the driver, he kneeling beside him for only a moment before standing and shaking his head. "Gone. You the only other one?" "There were 2 others. They ran when the horses bolted." He cursed under his breath, looking out into the storm. "Damn fools will get themselves killed. Can you ride?" "I've never actually—" "That's a no, then." He moved back to her, and she could see him taking in her appearance, the fine fabric of her traveling dress now covered in dust, her dark hair coming loose from its pins. "I've got a place about 2 miles south, storm shelter. Can you walk?" "Yes, I think so." "Then we walk. Horse can't carry us both through this, and I don't fancy getting thrown." He pulled the bandana down long enough to spit dust from his mouth, and she caught a glimpse of a face that was younger than she expected. Perhaps 27 or 28, with a strong jaw and lips pressed into a grim line. Then the bandana was back in place, and he was reaching for her arm. "Stay close. If you lose me in this, you're dead." It was not a comfort, but it was honest. Emmeline took his arm, and they began to walk. The 2 miles felt like 20. The man moved steadily forward, one hand on his horse's reins, the other keeping Emmeline close. She stumbled repeatedly over unseen obstacles, and each time his grip tightened, keeping her upright. He did not speak, and she did not have the breath to attempt conversation. All her focus narrowed to putting one foot in front of the other, to keeping hold of his arm, to breathing through the handkerchief that was now more brown than white. When the structure finally appeared through the dust, it was so sudden that she nearly walked into it. A small house, low to the ground and built of sod, with a barn nearby that looked sturdier than the house itself. The man led them to the barn first, getting the horse inside and out of the wind before guiding Emmeline to the house. The interior was dim and cool, one room with a narrow bed, a stove, a table with 2 chairs, and not much else. He closed the door behind them, shutting out the worst of the wind, and the sudden relative quiet was almost shocking. Emmeline pulled the handkerchief from her face and immediately began coughing. doubling over as her lungs tried to expel the dust she had been breathing. The man moved to a shelf, poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup, and handed it to her without a word. She drank gratefully, the water cutting through the grit in her throat. "Thank you?" He nodded, pulling off his hat and bandana. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and longer than was fashionable, curling slightly at his collar. The face she had glimpsed earlier was angular and weathered, with lines around his eyes that suggested he spent most of his time squinting into the sun. He was handsome in a hard sort of way, like something carved from the same unforgiving landscape that surrounded them. "Name's Cole," he said, setting his hat on the table. "Cole Banning. Emmeline Harper, Miss Harper." She set down the cup, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. "I was traveling to a teaching position in Cedar Falls." "You're going the wrong direction. Cedar Falls is northwest." The stage was taking a route to avoid some kind of trouble. "Are raiders or outlaws or something of that nature?" She touched her temple gingerly, feeling the cut there. It was not deep, but it stung. "I don't suppose you have any medical supplies?" "Some." He moved to a trunk in the corner, pulling out a small tin that proved to contain bandages and a bottle of what smelled like pure alcohol when he opened it. "Sit." Emmeline sat in one of the chairs, and he pulled the other close, setting the supplies on the table. His movements were efficient as he dampened a cloth with water and began cleaning the wound. She hissed at the sting. "Sorry." His voice was flat, but his touch gentled slightly. "Not deep. Won't need stitches." "That's fortunate." She watched his face as he worked, noting the concentration there, at the way his gray eyes focused on the task with an intensity that seemed excessive for such a minor injury. "Do you live here alone, Mr. Banning?" "Cole. And yes." He reached for the alcohol. "This'll sting worse." It did. She gritted her teeth as he applied it, her hands clenching in her lap. He worked quickly, then applied a small bandage, his fingers surprisingly gentle for someone who looked so rough. "There. Keep it clean and dry, and it should heal fine." He stood, returning the supplies to the trunk. "Storm should pass by nightfall. I'll take you back to Abilene in the morning." "I couldn't impose." "You already are. One more night won't make a difference." He moved to the stove, adding wood from a box nearby. "I don't have much in the way of food. Beans and cornbread. You're welcome to it." "That sounds wonderful. Actually, I haven't eaten since breakfast." He nodded and began preparing the meal with the same quiet efficiency he had shown with everything else. Emmeline watched him, trying to reconcile the careful way he moved with the hardness of his appearance. There was something almost contradictory about him, as if he were two different people occupying the same body. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sounds of cooking and the wind still howling outside. Emmeline had never been comfortable with silence. In Boston there had always been noise, always conversation, always something happening. Here the quiet felt like a living thing pressing in on her. "Have you lived here long?" she asked finally. 3 years. "Do you ranch, farm?" "Some of both, enough to get by." He stirred the beans, not looking at her. It must be lonely." That made him glance up, those gray eyes meeting hers for a moment before looking away again. "I don't mind lonely." It was clearly the end of that particular line of conversation. Emmeline subsided, folding her hands in her lap and trying not to feel like an intruder. The meal was ready soon enough, and he served them both with the same quiet efficiency. The food was simple, but well prepared, and she ate hungrily, surprised by how good plain beans and cornbread could taste when you were exhausted and filthy and grateful to be alive. "This is delicious," she said. "Thank you." "It's just beans." Nevertheless. She set down her spoon, studying him across the table. "You saved my life today, Mr. Banning Cole. I want you to know that I'm grateful." He shifted uncomfortably, not quite looking at her. "Any decent person would have done the same." "Perhaps, but you're the one who did?" She smiled, hoping to see some softening in his expression, but he just nodded and went back to eating. After the meal, he offered her the bed, saying he would sleep on the floor. She protested, but he was immovable on the subject, and eventually she gave in, too exhausted to argue further. He stepped outside to check on the horse while she changed out of her ruined dress into her nightgown, grateful that she at least had the clothes she had been wearing when the accident happened. When he came back inside, the storm had finally begun to diminish, the howling wind fading to a low moan. He spread a blanket on the floor near the stove and lay down without ceremony, not even removing his boots. "Cole?" Emmeline spoke softly from the bed, her voice barely audible in the darkness. "Yeah? Why do you live out here alone, if you don't mind my asking?" There was a long pause. She had almost decided he was not going to answer when his voice came out of the darkness, rough and low. "Easier this way." "Easier than what?" Another pause, even longer this time. "Easier than lying." She did not know what to say to that, and before she could formulate a response, his breathing had evened out into the rhythm of sleep. Emmeline lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind die down and thinking about those two words, easier than lying. What did that mean? What was he hiding from? Or what had he done that made solitude preferable to human company? She had come west looking for adventure, for freedom, for something different from the constrained life she had always known. And she had not expected to find mystery in the form of a taciturn cowboy who saved her life and then retreated into silence. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was a long time coming. Morning arrived with brilliant sunshine, as if the storm had never happened. Emmeline woke to find Cole already up, standing at the small window and looking out at the landscape. He had made coffee, and the smell of it filled the small space. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Coffee's ready if you want some." "Thank you." She sat up, pushing her hair back from her face. It was a tangled mess, but there was nothing to be done about it now. "Has the storm cleared completely?" "Mostly, still some wind, but nothing dangerous." He turned to face her, and in the morning light she could see him more clearly than she had the night before. The lines on his face were deeper than she had thought, etched there by sun and wind and something else, something that looked like weariness. "I'll saddle up and take you back to town after you've eaten." "I hate to continue imposing on your hospitality." "Not an imposition, just the right thing to do." He poured coffee into 2 cups, handing her one. "Besides, I need to report about the stage driver. Law will want to know." They ate a simple breakfast of more cornbread and some jerky, and then Emmeline changed back into her traveling dress, brushing off as much dust as she could. It was wrinkled and stained, but it would have to do. Cole saddled his horse, a paint mare with intelligent eyes, and then helped Emmeline up before swinging into the saddle behind her. The ride back to Abilene took the better part of 3 hours, moving slowly across the storm-altered landscape. Cole kept one arm around Emmeline's waist to steady her, and she was acutely aware of the warmth of him behind her, the solid presence that had pulled her from the wreckage. They did not speak much during the ride, but it was a more comfortable silence than the night before, as if they had reached some kind of understanding. Abilene was a bustling town, loud and crowded and overwhelming after the quiet of Cole's homestead. He took her directly to the sheriff's office, where she gave her statement about the accident while Cole did the same. The sheriff was a heavy-set man with a graying beard and a world-weary expression. "I'll send some men out to retrieve the body and see what can be salvaged from the stage," he said after they had finished. "Miss Harper, where are you staying?" "I hadn't arranged anything. I was supposed to continue on to Cedar Falls today." "Well, that's not happening. Next stage won't be through until day after tomorrow. And that's assuming the company sends one at all after this." He scratched his beard. "Might want to try the boarding house on Main Street. Mrs. Patterson runs a respectable place." Cole had been standing near the door, his hat in his hands, but now he spoke up. "I can take her there." The sheriff nodded. "Appreciate it, Cole. Good thing you were out there yesterday." "Just lucky." They left the sheriff's office, and Cole led her through the crowded streets to the boarding house, a two-story building with a neat front porch. Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a round, cheerful woman in her 50s who clucked over Emmeline's bedraggled appearance and immediately promised her a room and a hot bath. "Poor dear, what an ordeal," she said, patting Emmeline's hand. "Don't you worry about a thing. We'll get you sorted out." Emmeline turned to Cole, who was already backing toward the door. "Wait, I didn't even properly thank you." "No need." "There's every need. You saved my life, gave me shelter, brought me safely to town. I'm in your debt, Cole Banning." He looked uncomfortable, turning his hat in his hands. "You don't owe me anything, Miss Harper. I hope you make it to Cedar Falls safe." "Will you be in town long? Perhaps I could buy you dinner as a small token of my gratitude." "I don't think—" "Please, just dinner. I would feel terrible if I didn't at least do that much." He hesitated, and she could see the internal struggle on his face. Finally, he nodded once, a quick jerk of his head. "All right, one dinner. There's a place called the Silver Spur on the east end of town. 6 o'clock?" "6 o'clock," she agreed, smiling. "I'll be there." He left quickly after that, as if afraid she might extract some other promise from him. Mrs. Patterson watched him go with interest. "That's Cole Banning," she said thoughtfully. "Keeps to himself, that one. Comes to town maybe once a month for supplies and then disappears again. Used to be different, I hear, before he left." "Left?" Emmeline followed her up the stairs to a small but clean room. "Oh, he grew up around here, worked on one of the big ranches when he was young. Then he went away for a few years, and when he came back he was changed. Wouldn't talk to anyone. I wouldn't hire on anywhere. Just bought that little plot of land and built himself a place. That was 3 years ago, and he's been a hermit ever since." "Did something happen to him?" "Nobody knows. Like I said, he doesn't talk about it." Mrs. Patterson opened the door to reveal a room with a bed, a washstand, and a small wardrobe. "Now you get yourself cleaned up, and I'll bring you some hot water. You'll feel much better after a bath." She was right. The bath was heaven, washing away the dust and grime of the storm. Emmeline washed her hair twice and then sat in the cooling water thinking about Cole Banning and his mysterious past, a man who said it was easier to live alone than to lie, a man who had been different once before something changed him. She should leave it alone. She should focus on getting to Cedar Falls and starting her new position. Cole Banning's secrets were none of her business. But as she dressed in a clean traveling suit from her trunk, which had been recovered from the stagecoach wreckage and delivered to the boarding house, she found herself looking forward to dinner with an anticipation that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the mystery of the man himself. The Silver Spur was a respectable establishment, more restaurant than saloon, with white tablecloths and actual menus. Emmeline arrived promptly at 6 to find Cole already there, sitting at a corner table with his back to the wall. He had cleaned up as well, she noticed, wearing a shirt that looked freshly laundered and with his hair still damp from washing. He stood when she approached, a gesture of manners that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. "Miss Harper." "Emmeline, please." "I think we can dispense with formalities after I've slept in your house." A ghost of a smile flickered across his face, so brief she almost missed it. "Emmeline, then. And you've already decided I'm Cole, so I suppose that's settled." They sat, and a waitress came to take their order. The meal was simple, but good. Steak and potatoes and fresh bread, and for a while they ate in silence. Emmeline found herself studying him again, noting the way he kept his eyes on his plate or on the room, never quite meeting her gaze for more than a moment. "Mrs. Patterson tells me you grew up around here," she said finally. His jaw tightened slightly. "She talks too much." She was just making conversation. "She seems fond of you." "She doesn't know me." "Maybe that's why she's fond of you." Emmeline smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "Mystery is intriguing." "There's no mystery. I'm just a man trying to live quiet." "A man who once lived differently." She saw him tense and hurried on. "I'm not prying. Or perhaps I am, but not maliciously. I'm just curious. You're not what I expected when I pictured the West." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Cowboys and gunfighters and wild men. You're none of those things." I'm a cowboy. I work cattle. But you're educated. I can tell by the way you speak. And you're gentle. The way you tended my wound, the way you handle your horse, there's a contradiction there. He set down his fork, finally meeting her eyes. His expression was guarded. Why does it matter to you? Because you saved my life, and now I'm curious about who you are. I'm nobody. That's the whole point. He picked up his fork again, stabbing at a piece of steak with more force than necessary. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude, I'm just not used to talking to people. That much is clear. She said it gently without judgment and saw some of the tension leave his shoulders. For what it's worth, I think you're doing a fine job. You haven't scared me away yet. Give it time. They finished the meal, and Cole insisted on paying despite Emmeline's protests that this was supposed to be her treat. They stepped out into the evening air, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and red on the horizon. Thank you for dinner, Emmeline said. And for the company. You're welcome. He stood there for a moment, his hat in his hands again, turning it by the brim. When's your stage? Day after tomorrow, if one comes. It'll come. Company can't afford to lose the route. He hesitated, then said in a rush, If you wanted, I could show you around Abilene tomorrow. It's not much, but it's something to do besides sitting in a boarding house. Emmeline felt something warm bloom in her chest. I would like that very much. 10 o'clock? I'll come by the boarding house. 10 o'clock, she agreed. He left, and she watched him go, walking with that same purposeful stride through the dusty streets. There was something about him that pulled at her, something broken that she wanted to understand and perhaps help mend. It was foolish, she knew. She was leaving in 2 days. Whatever this was, it could not go anywhere. But for 2 days, she could be curious. For 2 days, she could try to solve the mystery of Cole Banning. He arrived at exactly 10 the next morning, leading his horse rather than riding. Emmeline had dressed in her simplest day dress, knowing they would be walking through a dusty town, and had pinned her hair up carefully. Morning, Cole said, touching his hat brim. Sleep well? Very well, thank you. And you? Well enough. He glanced at her, then away. Thought we could start with the general store. Mr. Hendricks has been here since the town was founded. He can tell you stories about the early days if you get him talking. They walked through the morning streets, and Cole proved to be a surprisingly good guide. He knew the history of every building, every business. Yeah, and, while he was not exactly talkative, he answered her questions readily enough. Mr. Hendricks at the general store was indeed full of stories, and Cole stood patiently while the old man regaled Emmeline with tales of Indian raids and cattle drives and the year the creek flooded and nearly washed away half the town. After the general store, Cole took her to the church, a simple white building with a bell tower, and then to the schoolhouse, which was currently empty for the summer. This is where you would have taught if you had stayed in Abilene. No, Cole said, standing in the doorway. It's smaller than I expected. Emmeline walked between the rows of desks, trailing her fingers over the worn wood. But nice. There's something peaceful about a schoolhouse, don't you think? All that potential for learning. I never had much schooling myself, just what my mother taught me before she died. It was the first personal thing he had volunteered, and Emmeline seized on it carefully. Your mother taught you? She must have been educated. She was a teacher back east, Philadelphia. Met my father when he came through on business, and she followed him out here. Cole leaned against the doorframe, his eyes distant. She used to say it was the most foolish and best decision she ever made. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. His voice was soft. She died when I was 12. Fever. My father followed her 2 years later, same thing. I'm so sorry. Emmeline moved back toward him, close enough to see the old pain in his eyes. Why, it must have been terribly difficult. It was a long time ago. He straightened, pushing away from the doorframe. Come on, there's a place that serves good pie if you're interested. She let him change the subject, sensing that he had shared all he was willing to for the moment. They went to a small cafe where the pie was indeed excellent, And over slices of apple pie and coffee, Cole asked her about Boston, about her life there, about why she had decided to come west. "I wanted something different," Emmeline said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "My parents died when I was young, and I was raised by my aunt. She was very proper, very concerned with appearances and respectability. Everything had a rule, a right way to do things. I felt like I was suffocating." "So you came west to teach school?" There was something that might have been amusement in his voice. "I know it's not exactly wild rebellion, is it? But it was what I could do. The only real skill I have is teaching. And out here there's actually a demand for teachers. In Boston, I would have been competing with hundreds of other women for positions. Here I had 3 offers. Why Cedar Falls? It was the farthest away." She smiled ruefully. "Which I realize makes me sound terribly naive. But I wanted distance. I wanted to feel like I was really leaving, not just moving to the next town over." "You're brave," Cole said quietly, "coming out here alone, to a place you'd never been. Or foolish. Maybe both." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face, making him look years younger. But I think mostly brave." They spent the rest of the afternoon walking through Abilene, and Emmeline found herself enjoying his company more than she had expected. He was not a conversationalist by nature, but when he did speak, it was thoughtful and genuine. There was no artifice to him, no pretense. In a way, it was refreshing after years of Boston society where every word had to be weighed and measured for propriety. As the sun began to set, they found themselves on the edge of town, looking out at the prairie stretching endlessly to the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, and the air had cooled to a pleasant temperature. "It's beautiful," Emmeline said softly. "I've never seen anything like it. It grows on you, the space, the sky. Some people can't stand it, but others—" He trailed off, his eyes on the horizon. "Others find peace in it." Something like that. They stood in silence for a moment, and then Emmeline found herself saying, "You could tell me, whatever it is that brought you out here, whatever you're hiding from." Cole's jaw tightened, and she thought for a moment that he would walk away or shut down completely. But instead he took a deep breath and said, "I was a Pinkerton." Of all the things she might have expected, that was not one of them. "A detective? For 4 years. I was good at it too, real good. I could get people to trust me, to tell me things. I could lie so smooth that even I almost believed it." His voice was bitter. "I brought in counterfeiters and train robbers and all manner of criminals." "That sounds like honorable work." "It would have been, if I had stuck to criminals." He turned to face her, and his eyes were dark with old pain. "But the agency doesn't just go after criminals, Emmeline. They go after whoever they're paid to go after. Strikers, union organizers, people just trying to get fair wages." Understanding began to dawn. "You infiltrated a union." "A mining operation in Colorado. The workers were planning to strike for better conditions, safer practices. Men were dying in cave-ins from bad air, from exhaustion. The mine owners hired Pinkertons to find out who the leaders were." He looked away again, his hands clenching into fists. "I became friends with them. Good friends. They trusted me. One of them, a man named Thomas Riley, he invited me to his home for dinner. His wife made the best stew I've ever tasted. And his kids, 3 little girls. They called me Uncle Cole." Emmeline felt her heart constrict. "What happened?" "I gave the agency their names, all of them. The mine owners had them blacklisted, run out of town. Thomas couldn't find work anywhere. I heard later that he died that winter. Him and his whole family froze to death in a shack outside Denver because they had nowhere else to go." His voice cracked. 3 little girls who called me uncle. "Oh, Cole. I quit the agency that day, came back here, bought land, built a house, and I swore I would never lie to another person as long as I lived." He finally looked at her again, and she could see the anguish in his eyes. "That's why I live alone, Emmeline. Because every relationship is built on little lies, social niceties, polite fictions, and I can't do it anymore. I can't pretend." So it's easier to just not talk to anyone at all. She understood now the weight he carried, the reason for his isolation. But you talked to me. I didn't mean to. He smiled sadly. You were just there, and then you asked questions, and I couldn't seem to help myself. You're the first person I've told the truth to in a very long and lonesome time. Emmeline reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses there, the evidence of hard work. Thank you for trusting me with it. You'll leave day after tomorrow, and then it won't matter. It matters to me. She squeezed his hand gently. What you did was terrible, Cole, but you were following orders, doing what you thought was your job, and you've spent 3 years punishing yourself for it. Those little girls are still dead, yes, and nothing you do will change that. But living alone and refusing to connect with anyone, that's not penance. That's just another form of running away. He pulled his hand from hers, his expression closing off. You don't understand. Maybe not, but I understand loneliness, and I understand guilt, and I know that neither of them gets better when you're alone. She touched his arm lightly. I'm not saying you should forgive yourself. I'm just saying that maybe you don't have to keep punishing yourself forever. I should get you back to the boarding house. It's getting dark. The moment had passed, and Emmeline knew better than to push further. They walked back to town in silence, and when they reached Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, Cole touched his hat brim and said goodnight without meeting her eyes. Will I see you tomorrow before I leave? She asked. I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? He looked at her then, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Because I'm starting to want things I can't have. Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, his long strides carrying him quickly down the street and out of sight. Emmeline stood on the porch, her heart beating faster than it should, and realized with sudden clarity that she was beginning to feel the same way. She barely slept that night, tossing and turning as she thought about Cole, about his confession, about the pain he carried. She thought about his words. I'm starting to want things I can't have. Did he mean her? And if so, why couldn't he have her? The answer was obvious, of course. She was leaving. She had a position waiting for her in Cedar Falls, a new life to begin. And he was a man who had sworn off lying, who had isolated himself to avoid the small deceits that social interaction required. What kind of relationship could they possibly build on that foundation? But the heart did not care about logic or practical considerations. The heart only knew that she had felt more alive in 2 days with Cole Banning than she had in 23 years in Boston. The heart only knew that when he smiled, truly smiled, it felt like sunshine breaking through clouds. Morning came too quickly. Emmeline dressed and packed her few belongings, settling her bill with Mrs. Patterson. The stage was due at noon, and she spent the morning sitting in the front parlor trying to read a book and failing miserably to concentrate on the words. At 11 there was a knock at the door, and Mrs. Patterson answered it. Emmeline heard a familiar voice and her heart leaped. Is Miss Harper available? Cole asked. She is indeed. Come in, come in. He stepped into the parlor, hat in hands as always, and Emmeline stood to meet him. He looked like he had slept as poorly as she had, with shadows under his eyes and tension in his shoulders. I know I said I wouldn't come, he said without preamble, but I couldn't let you leave without saying goodbye properly. I'm glad you came. They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with everything unsaid. Finally, Cole reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, holding it out to her. This was my mother's, he said. It's not worth much, but it's the only thing I have of hers. I want you to have it. Emmeline looked down at her palm. It was a small brooch, on silver with a single blue stone set in the center. It was simple but beautiful, the kind of thing that spoke of sentiment rather than value. Cole, I can't take this. Please, I want you to have something to remember me by. He closed her fingers around the brooch. And I want to know that a part of my mother is with someone who would have appreciated her. You remind me of her, actually, that same determination to make something of yourself, that same courage. Tears pricked at Emmeline's eyes. Thank you. I'll treasure it. Emmeline, He stopped, struggling with words. These past 2 days have been the best I've had in 3 years, maybe longer. You made me remember what it's like to talk to someone, to connect with another person. I know you have to go, and I know I have no right to ask you to do anything different. But I want you to know that you've made a difference. To me. You've made a difference to me too, she whispered. More than you know. The sound of a stage horn echoed through the town, announcing the arrival of the noon stage. Cole flinched at the sound. That's your ride. Cole, what if... She stopped, not sure how to finish the sentence. What if I stayed? What if you came with me? What if we tried to make this work? Don't, he said gently. Don't give up your new life for a broken man you've known for 2 days. You're not broken. I'm close enough. He stepped back, putting distance between them. Go to Cedar Falls. Teach those children. Live the life you came out here to find. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway. The stage is loading, dear. You should go. Emmeline picked up her carpet bag, on the brooch clutched tightly in her other hand. She walked past Cole, breathing in the scent of him, horses and leather and something else, something uniquely him. At the door, she turned back. If you ever change your mind about living alone, I'll be in Cedar Falls. Ask for the schoolteacher. I'll remember. She walked out into the bright sunshine, climbed into the stage, and settled herself in the seat. As the stage pulled away, she looked back through the window. Cole stood in the street watching her go, his hat in his hands, and his expression unreadable. The journey to Cedar Falls took 2 days, with an overnight stop at a way station. Emmeline spent the time staring out the window at the passing landscape, thinking about Cole and wondering if she was making a terrible mistake. She had come west for a new life, aimed for freedom and adventure, and she was still getting that. The teaching position would be challenging and rewarding. Cedar Falls would be her home, but it all felt hollow without the possibility of seeing Cole again, of continuing whatever had begun to grow between them in those 2 short days. Cedar Falls proved to be exactly what she had expected. A small settlement with a general store, a church, a saloon, and scattered homes. The school was a one-room building on the edge of town, and the teachers' quarters were attached to it, a small space with a bed, a stove, and a desk. It was sparse but clean, and Emmeline set about making it a home. The people of Cedar Falls were welcoming, if a bit curious about the young woman from Boston who had come to teach their children. She met with each family, learning about their children and what they hoped education would provide. She prepared her lessons, organized the schoolhouse, and threw herself into work with a determination that bordered on desperation. Because if she stopped working, she thought about Cole. If she let herself be still, she remembered the way his eyes looked in the lamplight, the gentleness of his hands, the honesty in his voice when he told her his truth. She remembered him saying she was the first person he had told the truth to in a very long and lonesome time, and she wondered if he had retreated back into his isolation, if he regretted opening up to her. 3 weeks into her time in Cedar Falls, school began. She had 12 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old, and they were a challenge and a joy. Teaching consumed her days. And by the time evening came, she was exhausted enough to sleep without dreaming. But the dreams came anyway. Dreams where Cole appeared at her door, where he told her he could not live without her, where they found a way to make it work. She would wake with tears on her cheeks and an ache in her chest that would not fade. 6 weeks after leaving Abilene, a supply wagon came through Cedar Falls on its way back from a larger town to the east. The driver handed her a letter, and her heart stopped when she saw her name written in an unfamiliar hand. She waited until she was alone in her quarters to open it, her hands shaking. Dear Emmeline, I hope this letter finds you well, and that Cedar Falls has lived up to your expectations. I have started and discarded this letter a dozen times trying to find the right words. The truth is, there are no right words, so I will just speak plainly as you taught me to do. I cannot stop thinking about you. I have tried. God knows I have tried. I have worked myself to exhaustion, spent every waking hour trying to forget the way you smiled, the way you listened without judgment, the way you made me feel human again. It is not working. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. You have built a life in Cedar Falls, and you deserve every happiness. But I find myself wondering if there might be room in that life for a damaged cowboy who wants to learn how to live again. I do not know what I am offering. I do not have much beyond my homestead and my horse. I cannot promise that I will not struggle with the ghosts that haunt me, but I can promise that I will be honest with you always. I can promise that I will work hard to be worthy of your regard. If you think there might be a chance for us, send word to the general store in Abilene. If not, I will understand, and I will not trouble you again. Yours in truth. Cole Banning Emmeline read the letter 3 times, her heart pounding. He had written to her. He wanted to try. The joy that flooded through her was almost painful in its intensity. She sat down at her desk and pulled out paper and pen, writing quickly before she could second-guess herself. Dear Cole, there is absolutely room in my life for a cowboy who wants to learn how to live again. In fact, I have been saving a space for exactly that. Cedar Falls needs a capable man who knows cattle and horses. The settlement is growing, and several families have talked about expanding their herds. Now, there would be work for you here, if you wanted it. More importantly, I need you here. These past 6 weeks have been lonely in a way I've never experienced before. I keep looking up, expecting to see you standing there with that serious expression, and every time I realize you are not, it hurts a little more. Come to Cedar Falls, Cole. Let us see what we can build together. Yours in hope, Emmeline Harper. She sent the letter back with the supply wagon, paid extra to ensure it would be delivered quickly, and then she waited. The waiting was agony. She taught her classes, met with parents, prepared lessons, all while watching the road for any sign of a rider on a paint horse. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Emmeline began to think he had changed his mind, that the letter had been a moment of weakness he regretted. When she threw herself into her work with renewed determination, trying not to let the disappointment crush her. And then, on a Thursday afternoon in late October, she looked up from her desk where she was grading papers to see a familiar figure standing in the doorway of the schoolhouse. Cole looked thinner than she remembered, his face shadowed by his hat, his posture uncertain. He held his hat in his hands, turning it by the brim in that familiar gesture. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. Emmeline stood so quickly that her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You came. You invited me." He stepped into the schoolhouse, his eyes taking in the neat rows of desks, the chalkboard with its lessons still written there, the maps on the walls. "This is a good space. You've made it welcoming. The children like it." She could not seem to move, afraid that if she did, he would disappear like smoke. "How long did it take you to get here?" 4 days. I sold most of what I had, kept my horse and my tools and not much else. Figured I could start fresh here if you would have me." "If I would have you?" She laughed, the sound wavering with emotion. "Cole, I have been waiting for you every day since I sent that letter. I almost didn't come. I kept thinking about all the reasons it wouldn't work, all the ways I could disappoint you." He took a step closer. "But then I remembered what you said about punishing myself being just another form of running away. And I decided I was done running." Emmeline crossed the distance between them in 3 quick steps, and then she was in his arms. Her face pressed against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him. His arms came around her, holding her tight, and she felt him trembling. "I missed you," she whispered against his shirt. "So much." "I missed you too. Every day." His voice was rough. Emmeline, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be with someone after so long alone. Neither do I, not really. She pulled back enough to look up at him. But we'll figure it out together. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she had not realized she was crying. You're the bravest person I've ever met, says the man who rode 4 days to tell a woman he's known for 2 days that he couldn't stop thinking about her. 4 days and 6 weeks. He smiled, that transformative smile that made her heart skip. I've known you for 2 days and 6 weeks, and I think I might be falling in love with you. Only might be? She smiled through her tears. I'm definitely falling in love with you, Cole Banning. I think I started the moment you walked out of that dust storm. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was a first kiss and a homecoming all at once, and when they finally pulled apart, Emmeline felt like she could breathe fully for the first time in weeks. I should probably find the people you mentioned who need help with cattle, Cole said, his arms still around her. I'll need work if I'm going to stay here. Tomorrow, Emmeline said firmly. Tonight, let me just be happy that you're here. Tomorrow, he agreed. He found work easily enough. Cedar Falls was indeed growing, and several families were looking to expand their operations. Cole hired on with a rancher named Morrison, who had a spread just outside of town. The work was honest and hard, and Cole threw himself into it with the same intensity he had once applied to being a Pinkerton, but this time without the weight of deception. He rented a small room above the general store, close enough to the school that he could walk there after work. He and Emmeline fell into a pattern of spending evenings together, sitting on the steps of the schoolhouse as the sun set, talking about everything and nothing. He told her more about his childhood, about his parents, about the years after their deaths when he had drifted from job to job. She told him about Boston, about her aunt's rigid expectations, about her dreams of making a difference in young lives. The people of Cedar Falls watched their courtship with interest and approval. Cole was quiet but capable, and it quickly became clear that he knew cattle and horses better than anyone in the settlement. Emmeline was well-liked, and her students adored her. They were, the townspeople agreed, a good match. As autumn turned to winter, Cole and Emmeline's relationship deepened. There were difficult moments, times when Cole's past would rise up and he would withdraw into himself, going silent and unreachable. But Emmeline learned to recognize the signs, learned when to give him space, and when to gently pull him back. And slowly, painfully, Cole began to forgive himself. It was not a quick process. Some days were harder than others, but with Emmeline beside him, Cole found that the weight he carried became a little more bearable. He started attending church services, something he had not done since leaving the Pinkertons. He joined the other men for barn raisings and town meetings. He was still quiet, still private, but he was no longer isolated. In December, Cole asked Emmeline to marry him. It was not a dramatic proposal, no grand gestures or flowery speeches. They were sitting on the schoolhouse steps as they did most evenings, watching the first snow of winter fall, when he simply turned to her and said, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me? Emmeline looked at him, at this man who had risked everything to give her the truth, who had left his isolation to build a life with her, and she felt her heart swell with so much love that she thought it might burst. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will marry you. They were married on Christmas Day in the small church, with the entire town in attendance. Emmeline wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson, the general store owner's wife, had helped her make. Cole wore a new suit that was slightly too formal for him, but that made him look impossibly handsome. The ceremony was brief, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed Emmeline with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of more than one witness. The town held a dance in their honor that evening in the church hall, and Emmeline danced until her feet hurt, pulled from partner to partner by enthusiastic well-wishers. But her favorite dances were with Cole, who held her close and moved with a surprising grace. Happy? He asked as they swayed to a waltz. Impossibly happy, she replied. You? More than I ever thought possible. He pulled her closer, his lips against her ear. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for coming to Cedar Falls. I would have followed you anywhere. It just took me a while to admit it. They spent their wedding night in Cole's small room above the general store, and if it was cramped and cold, neither of them cared. They were together, and that was all that mattered. In the spring, Cole and a group of men from town built a house on a piece of land Morrison had sold to Cole at a fair price. It was larger than Cole's old soddy, with 2 rooms and a real floor, and Emmeline delighted in making it a home. She planted a garden, made curtains for the windows, and filled the shelves with books. The house was finished just in time because in August, Emmeline gave birth to their first child, a son they named Thomas, after the man Cole had betrayed. It was Cole's idea, and Emmeline had cried when he suggested it. I can't bring him back, Cole said, holding the tiny baby with a mixture of awe and terror. I can't undo what I did, but I can honor his memory. I can raise my son to be honest and kind, and to stand up for what's right. Thomas was a healthy baby, with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. Cole was a devoted father, patient and gentle, and watching him with their son made Emmeline love him even more. He sang to Thomas in the evenings, old songs his mother had taught him, and he told him stories about the prairie and the stars. Emmeline continued teaching for another year, but when their daughter was born, a little girl they named Clara after Cole's mother, she decided to focus on raising their children. It was not an easy decision, but Cole supported whatever she chose, and she knew she could always return to teaching later. Cole prospered in Cedar Falls. His reputation as a fair and knowledgeable rancher grew, and eventually he was able to buy his own small herd. It was not a large operation, but it was enough to support his growing family comfortably. He hired on occasional help during busy seasons, but did most of the work himself, taking pride in what he had built with honest labor. The children grew. Thomas was serious and thoughtful like his father, always asking questions and wanting to understand how things worked. Clara was energetic and curious, constantly getting into mischief and making her parents laugh with her antics. 2 years after Clara, they had another son, James, who was quiet and gentle and loved animals with a fierce passion. Cole never completely forgot his past, but with Emmeline's help, he learned to live with it. He was honest with his children as they grew old enough to understand, telling them about his time as a Pinkerton, about the terrible mistake he had made, about the importance of standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. Thomas, who had been named for the man who died because of Cole's actions, took the story to heart. He grew up to be a lawyer, dedicating his life to helping working people fight for their rights. Cole could not have been more proud. On their 10th anniversary, Cole and Emmeline returned to Abilene, leaving the children with Morrison's family. They visited the boarding house where they had said goodbye, and Mrs. Patterson, now gray but still cheerful, insisted they stay for dinner. I knew it the moment I saw you two together, she said, serving them generous portions of roast chicken. I told Mr. Patterson, I said, those two are meant for each other, you mark my words. After dinner, they rode out to Cole's old homestead. The soddy had collapsed in on itself, reclaimed by the prairie, but the barn still stood. They walked through the empty space, remembering. I stood right here, Cole said, standing near where the door had been, and I thought my life was over. I thought I would live alone until I died, and that would be my punishment. And instead? Emmeline slipped her hand into his. Instead, I found you. Instead, I found a reason to live again. He turned to face her, and she could see everything in his eyes, all the love and gratitude and wonder. You saved me, Emmeline. Just as surely as I pulled you from that stagecoach wreck, you saved me. We saved each other, she corrected gently. I was suffocating in Boston, playing a role I never wanted. You showed me that it was possible to live honestly, to be exactly who you are. They stood there in the ruins of his old life, holding hands and watching the sun set over the prairie, and Emmeline thought about the dust storm that had brought them together. It had seemed like a disaster at the time, like the worst possible luck. But it had led her to Cole, and Cole to her, and she would not change a single moment of it. The years continued to pass. The children grew and eventually left home to make their own ways in the world. Thomas became a successful lawyer in Kansas City, fighting for workers' rights and making a real difference. Clara married a teacher and opened a school of her own in a small town in Nebraska. James took over his father's cattle operation, expanding it with the same patient dedication Cole had shown. Cole and Emmeline grew old together. Cole's hair turned silver, and the lines on his face deepened, but his eyes remained the same gray, still capable of making Emmeline's heart skip when he looked at her a certain way. Emmeline's dark hair showed threads of white, and her hands became marked with the signs of age, but she remained as lively and curious as she had been that first day in Abilene. They settled into a comfortable rhythm, spending their days working side by side and their evenings sitting on the porch of their home, watching the sunset and talking about the day. Cole was never a man of many words, but he no longer retreated into silence. He had learned slowly, and with Emmeline's patient help, that it was possible to be honest without being cruel, to participate in the small social niceties without feeling like a liar. On a warm evening in June, 35 years after they first met, Cole and Emmeline sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. Their grandchildren were visiting, 5 of them now, and the house was full of noise and laughter. But for the moment, the children were occupied with games in the yard, and Cole and Emmeline had a rare moment of peace. "Do you ever regret it?" Cole asked suddenly. "Staying in Cedar Falls instead of moving to a bigger city? You could have had so much more." Emmeline looked at him in surprise. "More than this? More than a life with you? Our children? This home we built together? What more could I possibly want?" "You could have been a teacher in a real school with resources and support. You could have had fine things, culture, society." "I don't need any of that." She reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Everything I need is right here." Cole raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I love you. I tell you every day, but I want to make sure you know it. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. I love you too, and you are definitely the best thing that ever happened to me." She smiled at him, the same smile that had captivated him 3.5 decades ago. A dust storm and a broken stagecoach, and look where it led us. "You're the first person I told the truth to," Cole said softly. "Mom, and you're the last person I'll ever lie to." "Which is to say never," Emmeline clarified. "Which is to say never," he agreed. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. Their grandchildren's laughter floated on the evening air. And somewhere inside the house, their daughter-in-law was singing as she prepared dinner. It was an ordinary moment, unremarkable in its simplicity. But to Cole, who had once thought he would spend his life alone, it was everything. To Emmeline, who had fled Boston seeking something she could not name, it was the fulfillment of every dream she had never known she had. The dust storm that brought them together had seemed like chaos, like destruction, like the end of something. But it had been the beginning of a love story that would span decades, and that would create a family that would teach 2 lonely people that redemption and joy were possible even after the darkest times. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Cole pulled Emmeline closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. They did not need words. They had learned each other's language long ago, the silent communication of 2 people who had chosen each other every day for 35 years and would continue choosing each other for whatever time they had left. The West had been wild once, full of danger and uncertainty, but here, in this moment, on this porch, with this woman beside him, Cole Banning had found something better than wildness. He had found home. He had found peace. He had found love. and Emmeline Harper Banning, the teacher from Boston who had wanted adventure and freedom. Yer had found exactly what she was looking for in the gray eyes of a cowboy who had learned to tell the truth. Their story was not one that would be written in history books. There were no great battles, no dramatic rescues beyond that first dusty afternoon, no legendary feats. It was simply the story of two people who found each other when they needed it most, who chose to build a life together despite every reason not to, and who proved that sometimes the greatest adventures are the ones that lead you home. As they sat on that porch, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built, neither of them would have changed a single thing. The pain that had brought them to that point, Cole's guilt, and Emmeline's restlessness, had been necessary. Without it, they never would have found each other. Without it, they never would have known what it meant to be truly, completely, honestly loved. The night grew darker, and eventually their daughter-in-law called them in for dinner. Cole stood offering his hand to Emmeline with the same courtesy he had shown her on that first evening in Abilene. She took it, rising gracefully despite the stiffness in her joints, and they walked inside together hand in hand, as they had done for 35 years. Behind them, the prairie stretched out under the stars, vast and timeless and beautiful. The same prairie where a dust storm had changed two lives forever. The same prairie that had witnessed their first meeting, their courtship, their marriage, the births of their children, and every quiet moment in between. And if the wind whispered through the grass that night, and it carried with it the story of a love that had started with truth and had never wavered, a love that had transformed two lonely souls into a family, a legacy, a life well lived. In the warmth of their home, surrounded by the laughter of their grandchildren and the love of their family, Cole and Emmeline sat down to dinner. And as he passed her the bread and their fingers touched, as they had touched countless times before, they shared a smile that said everything words could not. They had found their happily ever after, not in spite of their pasts, but because of them. They had learned that truth was the foundation of love, that honesty was worth more than comfort, and that sometimes the longest journey is the one that leads you to another person's heart. The story that began in a dust storm in Kansas in 1878 would continue for many more years, through joys and sorrows, through births and deaths, through all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that make up a life. But this evening, this perfect evening with the whole family gathered around their table, was a moment of pure happiness, untainted by regret or worry. Cole looked around the table at his children and grandchildren, at the life he and Emmeline had created together, and he felt a peace he had never thought possible. The ghosts of his past were still there. They always would be, but they no longer haunted him. Thomas Riley's memory lived on in his oldest son who fought every day for the rights of working people. The lies he had told as a Pinkerton had been replaced by decades of truth and integrity. Emmeline caught his eye across the table and winked, a small private gesture that was just for him. After 35 years, she could still make his heart race with a single look. After 35 years, he still marveled at his good fortune in finding her. Grandpa, his youngest granddaughter Emma, tugged on his sleeve. "Will you tell us a story after dinner?" "What kind of story?" Cole asked, smiling down at her. "The one about the dust storm, when you met Grandma." It was their favorite story, the one they requested again and again. Cole glanced at Emmeline, who smiled and nodded. "All right," he said. "After dinner, I'll tell you about the day a dust storm brought me the greatest treasure of my life." And later, when the dishes were cleared and the family gathered in the living room, Cole told the story once more. He told them about the stagecoach wreck, about finding Emmeline clinging to the overturned coach, about the long walk through the storm. He told them about the 2 days in Abilene, about the dinner and the tour of the town, and the moment when he decided that living alone was not living at all. But this time, as he told the story, he added something new. He told them about what he had been running from, about his past as a Pinkerton, about the terrible mistake he had made, and the lives it had cost. He told them because they were old enough to understand now, because he wanted them to know that good people could make terrible mistakes, and that redemption was possible through honesty and hard work and love. The children listened with wide eyes, and when he finished, Thomas's oldest son, named Cole after his grandfather, spoke up. "But you became a good person, Grandpa. You fixed it." "I didn't fix it," Cole said gently. "I couldn't fix it. What I did will always be wrong, and those people will always be dead. But I learned from it. I spent the rest of my life trying to be better, trying to live honestly and help people instead of hurting them. And your father," he nodded to Thomas, "he's doing the work I should have done back then, standing up for people who need someone to fight for them." "And you found Grandma," Emma added. "That was good." "That was the best thing I ever did," Cole agreed. "Well, coming to Cedar Falls to be with her was the best thing I ever did. Finding her was just luck." "Good luck," Emma insisted. "The best luck," Cole said, reaching for Emmeline's hand. The evening wound down, and eventually the children were put to bed and their parents retired to the guest rooms. Cole and Emmeline were left alone in their living room, the house finally quiet. "You told them," Emmeline said softly, "about the Pinkertons. It was time. They're old enough to understand." Cole stared into the dying fire. "I want them to know that their grandfather was not perfect, that he made terrible mistakes. But I also want them to know that you don't have to be defined by your worst moments." "They love you," Emmeline said. "Nothing you told them tonight changed that." "I know, but it was important to say." He turned to look at her. "I never want them to think that honesty is easy or that doing the right thing is simple. It's not. It's hard and it hurts, and sometimes you fail, but you keep trying anyway. You're a good man, a Cole Banning." "I'm a man who tries to be good. There's a difference." He smiled. "But I'm a man who loves his wife more than anything in this world. That much is absolutely true." They sat together by the fire until it burned down to embers, and then they went to bed. Walking through the house they had built together, past the rooms where their grandchildren slept. In their bedroom, Cole helped Emmeline with the buttons on her dress, as he had done countless times before, and she helped him with his collar. They settled into bed, and Cole pulled Emmeline close, her head resting on his shoulder as it had for so many years. This was his favorite time of day, these quiet moments before sleep when it was just the two of them, the rest of the world shut outside their door. "Emmeline," he said softly. "If you could go back and change anything, would you?" She was quiet for a moment, thinking. "No," she said finally, "because changing anything might mean we never found each other, and I wouldn't risk that for anything." "Not even the stagecoach accident?" "Not even that. It brought me to you." Cole tightened his arms around her. "I love you more than I have words to express." "I know. You show me every day." She pressed a kiss to his jaw. "Now sleep. Tomorrow we have a house full of grandchildren who will be up at dawn demanding breakfast and adventures." "A house full of grandchildren," Cole marveled. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life." "Believe it," Emmeline said firmly. "You earned it. We both did." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, as they had done for 35 years. And outside, the prairie wind whispered through the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, and the world turned on, indifferent to the small dramas of human life. But in that house in Cedar Falls, Kansas, two people slept peacefully, their lives intertwined, their love unshakable. They had started as strangers thrown together by chance in a dust storm, and they had become partners, lovers, parents, grandparents. They had built a life from nothing but honesty and determination and love, and that, in the end, was the greatest adventure of all.